It's kind of fascinating. You look at something like the Minecraft movie looks like it's maybe going to hit $1 billion, really nailing it.
Yeah, totally. Capturing the zeitgeist, as they say.
Exactly. And then, like, right next to it, you've got something like the recent Snow White, which just seems to have, well, fallen flat. Didn't connect at all for a little.
Mm-hmm. Makes you wonder what the secret sauce is, What's working and what's just not.
Totally. And that huge difference, that kind of contrast, it gets you thinking, is something similar happening with the big fans? The ones we've followed for, like, forever.
That's the big question, isn't it? This kind of split. And yeah, it does lead you right into thinking about those established fans.
Which, yeah, that kind of brings us to what we wanted to really dive into today for you. Have you felt it? This kind of shift maybe in the air around some of the really beloved franchises.
Oh, definitely. You mean like Doctor Who, Star Trek?
Yeah, Doctor Who, Star Trek, Star Wars, Marvel, Lord of the Rings, DC. It just feels a bit different maybe lately.
It does. And we've been looking at some really interesting takes online, trying to figure out why it feels different.
Exactly. We found this YouTube commentator who had some sharp observations and also a really good article, actually, from a Doctor Who fan site. Doctor Who TV, I think it was, by Charlie Madison.
Right. So our goal here, our kind of mission for this deep dive, is to try and unpack that feeling, understand this perceived change in these worlds that means so much to you, to so many people, figure out what might be behind it.
Okay, so let's get right into it then. One of the first things that really jumped out from these sources, and I'm curious if this rings true for you listening, is this idea that the way fans talk about these things has changed, like fundamentally.
How so?
Well, it feels less about, arguing over plot twists or figuring out mysteries and way more about controversy, politics, identity politics, that kind of thing. Does that sound familiar from what you're saying online?
It's definitely an observation.
Right.
Yeah, it resonates. You see it everywhere. And what's interesting maybe is how this shift mirrors broader things happening in society.
Yeah.
Right. More political talk, demands for representation in media.
Sure, that makes sense.
But the tension comes when that bumps up against what fans already expect, or their sense of ownership almost over these stories they've loved for ages. You see the sparks fly in comment sections, forums.
Yeah, you really do. And sort of building on that, the Doctor Who TV article specifically talked about this feeling that these franchises, which maybe you remember as being really welcoming big tent kind of things, now feel almost antagonistic to some fans anyway. Like maybe you're not welcome if you don't see things a certain way. That's a pretty heavy feeling to have about something you used to just enjoy.
That's a really strong feeling, yeah. And it's not just Doctor Who. The sources suggest this is happening across different fandoms you might be into. Yeah. This idea that enjoying the story now comes with like unspoken rules or interpretations you have to agree with.
Right. And if you don't
align, you might get called out or just feel pushed to the side. And the interesting thing to explore is, well, how is that feeling created for you? Where does it come from?
Okay, yeah, because here's where it gets kind of spicy. The YouTube creator we watched, they basically suggest that maybe some of the people actually making the shows and movies are stirring the pot a bit.
Stirring the pot.
They use this term gaslighting headline, basically saying creators sometimes dismiss fan concerns or sort of invalidate them. And they had some specific examples that really paint a picture for you.
Okay, yeah, let's hear them, because that's a strong claim.
Well, okay, one example was around the new Doctor Who. Comments made by the new companion and the Doctor himself and Kuti Gatwa about Dr. Woke, implying that getting that kind of negative reaction was maybe a good or intended.
Right, I remember seeing that. And the YouTuber, they sort of contrasted that with maybe viewership numbers not being spectacular, suggesting a disconnect between what the creators say they want and how you, the audience, might actually be responding.
Exactly. And then there was Judy Gatwa involved in production somehow, apparently stating pretty directly that certain casting choices were meant to, quote, piss off so many people.
Wow. Okay. I mean, if that's accurate, that's a choice.
It is. It makes you wonder, right? Is it just trying to get attention, generate buzz, or is it genuinely wanting to, like, provoke the existing, which seems risky if you potentially push away people like yourself.
It does seem risky. And then there was the Star Wars actor commenting on the franchise being too white, basically.
Right.
Which, you can see the argument for more representation, absolutely. But for some longtime fans, maybe some like you listening, hearing that, might feel like it's dismissing the characters and history you grew up loving. It's tricky territory.
Very tricky. And it keeps going. Tim Miller, talking about Terminator Dark Fate, apparently said it was made to scare the fuck out of misogynist internet trolls.
Another really direct confrontational statement.
Yeah. Again, maybe some people cheer that on, but it's definitely drawing a line in the sand, isn't it? It risks alienating parts of the potential audience, whether the criticism they're targeting is valid or not.
Precisely. And the YouTuber also mentioned Kathleen Kennedy suggesting women in Star Wars face pushback because the fandom is mostly male, and reports about Amazon's Jennifer Salk maybe saying some negative things about fans before Rings of Power even came out.
Right. So whether these things are exactly accurate or just the perception, they all add up, according to the source, to this feeling of maybe a breakdown in trust between creators and a chunk of the fan base, people like you who feel really invested.
A strained relationship. Yeah, that seems to be the idea.
So, okay, what's the impact on your experience as a fan?
Well, a big takeaway from these sources seems to be this feeling that the stories themselves, their focus has changed.
How so?
The feeling is they're less about just being good stories for everyone and more about proving a point, making a statement.
The message over story idea. Exactly. And the YouTuber gave specific examples of how characters you love might feel different now. Altered, maybe.
Right. And what's key here, I think, is the perception of why they feel different.
Yeah.
It's not just change. It's change that feels motivated by something else.
Yeah. Like Luke Skywalker being shown as, disillusioned, kind of broken, Jean-Luc Picard seeming lost, Indiana Jones feeling maybe a bit downbeat.
Okay. Characters maybe not living up to their established heroic images.
Something like that. Or Spock suddenly having a foster sister in Star Trek. Or Galadriel's whole arc in Rings of Power. These are cited as examples where the character's journey might feel less organic and more like it's serving a specific, maybe external message.
Gotcha. Change that doesn't quite feel earned by the story itself, perhaps.
Right. And to really hammer it home for you, the YouTuber uses this, deliberately absurd hypothetical example of William Hartnell's original Doctor Who being regenerated into, quote, a little black girl. Now, they're very clear this is extreme, it's hyperbole, but it's used to illustrate this feeling some fans have, that the issue isn't necessarily inclusivity itself.
Right, not diversity per se.
But what they perceive as the dismantling or undermining of characters they've known and loved for ages, messing with the core of the character.
And that's a really, really crucial distinction they're making for you, the listener. It frames the complaint not as inherently anti-change or anti-diversity, but as a concern about, narrative integrity, respect for the source material that you hold dear.
Exactly. It raises that big question for you. How do you evolve a franchise while still honoring what made people like you fall in love with it in the first place? Where's the balance?
It's a tough balance to strike.
Now, look, we got to acknowledge fandom spaces online can be rough sometimes. Toxic fandom is definitely a real thing. No denying that.
Absolutely. Some criticism does cross the line.
The sources we looked at also make a really important point for you to think about. Not all criticism is toxic. Sometimes it just comes from passion, right? Strong feelings about something you care deeply about.
Yeah, passion can look like anger sometimes. The YouTuber mentioned that Henry Cavill quote, which I thought was great.
Oh, yeah.
Something like, it is a fan's right to have whatever opinion they want to have. And that kind of sums it up, doesn't it? We all connect with these things differently. And just because someone has a strong critique, it doesn't automatically mean they're a troll or acting in bad faith. You have to allow for genuine, passionate disagreement.
That's a great point. And it leads into another really interesting comparison the sources made for you, looking at how classic Doctor Who and Star Trek handled social issues versus how some of the modern stuff seems to do it. The argument is the older shows often used allegory, morality tales. They explored complex stuff, but maybe more subtle, without sacrificing the story or characters you cared about.
Right. It's fascinating when you think back. Classic Who, you had The Green Death, clearly about pollution and corporate greed.
Yeah.
Genesis of the Daleks, wrestling with the ethics of preemptive strike, essentially genocide.
Huge idea.
Massive. Or Star Trek Balance of Terror, confronting prejudice, fear of the other, the measure of a man, debating AI rights and what it means to be sentient. These were heavy themes, but woven into compelling sci-fi stories with characters that you, the viewer, were invested in.
Exactly. And crucially, it rarely felt like you were being lectured, did it? It made you think. It presented dilemmas. It connected on a human level, invited you into the debate.
The YouTuber even highlighted that amazing speech in the Zygon inversion from Modern Who, actually.
Oh, the scale model of war scene.
Yeah. A powerful anti-war message, but delivered through incredible character work and drama. It wasn't just a slogan flashed on screen.
Right. It earned its impact through storytelling.
Exactly. And connecting this back for you. The perception now, with some current shows, is that the approach is much more blunt. Like that big red highlighter pen the YouTuber talked about.
Yeah, subtleties maybe gone out the window sometime.
That's the feeling for some fans, that the message comes first, underlined, bolded, maybe even at the cost of a believable story or consistent characters that you've journeyed.
So, okay, if that is happening, if some creators are being deliberately provocative or prioritizing a message over everything else, why? What are the potential reasons behind that from your perspective as someone watching all this unfold?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The YouTuber floated a few ideas that might make sense to you. Maybe it's money controversy generates clicks, right? Maybe it's ego, creative hubris. Maybe it's genuine ideology wanting to push a certain viewpoint.
Or maybe just misunderstanding the audience.
Or even, misunderstanding what actually creates long-term engagement versus short-term buzz. They mentioned parrot analytics, this idea that studios might just look at any online noise, positive or negative, and think, great, people are talking. Even if the talk is furious fans saying they're tuning out, it's a potentially flawed metric for you to consider.
That's a bit worrying, isn't it? If controversy itself becomes the goal and the potential fallout seems pretty bad for its health.
Well, yeah. The argument from the YouTuber is that if you put the message first consistently, you risk just burning at your audience.
Yeah.
Leading to apathy. People just stop caring, which ultimately harms the thing you were trying to use for the message. It could really impact your future enjoyment.
Right. And they use this really evocative phrase for that, the long, dark apathy.
Yeah. Dramatic, but it captures that feeling, right, of just switching off, losing that emotional connection you once had.
And they suggested maybe The Acolyte, some recent Star Trek, maybe even current Doctor Who could be heading down that road, where you, the audience, just shrug and move on.
It's a worrying possibility for franchises with such dedicated following.
So yeah, the overall vibe from these perspectives we looked at, it's kind of one of disappointment, isn't it, for a lot of long times. People like yourself, perhaps.
Yeah.
A real total bummer, as Uber put it.
Yeah, a sense of letdown, that these worlds that used to bring so much excitement and, frankly, unity for many of you have somehow become battlegrounds or sources of frustration.
You definitely see that sentiment echoed online in communities you might be part of. A real sense of loss, almost, for what these things used to be and maybe frustration about where they're going. The passion is intense, even when it's negative.
It really is.
Yeah.
But it wasn't all doom and gloom, was it?
No, that's true. The YouTuber did end on a slightly more optimistic note, pointing out that fandom itself is, well, pretty tough, resilient.
Right. Even if the official stuff feels off, communities persist. People connect with each other. And maybe new things emerge. Fan creations, independent projects, things that maybe cater more directly to what you as a fan for.
Yeah, that's a really hopeful thought. That creativity doesn't just stop. Fandom finds a way, right? Maybe outside the big studios.
It often does. Fan fiction, fan films, discussions that keep the spirit alive. Maybe it even pushes creators to rethink things eventually. It redefines how you can participate in these universes you love.
So, okay, wrapping this deep dive up for you. We've really explored this tension between how these massive franchises are being handled right now, according to these sources, and the ripple effects on you, the longtime fan. We drew heavily on that YouTube commentary and the Doctor Who TV article.
And just to reiterate for you, our aim here wasn't to take sides on any of the politics involved in these discussions, but really just to understand and present the perspectives and concerns being voiced by fans, as highlighted in the material we reviewed.
Right, we're reporting on the conversation as we found it, which kind of leaves you with a final thought to chew on. Considering everything we've talked about, these perceived shifts, the creator comments, the fan reactions, what do you personally think the future holds for these fandoms, for the stories you love?
Yeah, is this current dynamic the new normal? Or are we maybe heading towards some kind of correction, a shift back? It's definitely something for you to mull over, thinking about your own connection to these fictional worlds.
Yeah.